Another key concept and some terminology when you're dealing with data binding are the concepts of sources and targets. Ultimately, when you're doing data binding, you have some data object that you're going to get some data out of that exposes properties, and those properties can be collections of individual objects. They can be a single complex object, or they could be properties exposing primitive values. And you want to data bind those to different elements within your screen. So for example, we want data to flow from the customer's property on our data object into a combo box and populate its drop-down list. We want to have a complex object property called selected customer in this case, bound to a collection of elements somewhere in our screen. In this case, a first name field, last name field, and email field come off of individual properties on that selected customer property. And then we might also have another collection down here, orders, that's going to flow into a data grid and provide the data source for that data grid. When you view data binding like this, it should become clear that the data object is the source object and the elements on the screen are the targets of the bindings. Now the bindings get declared on the target element and point to the source object that's going to feed them. So at a high level, data binding basically flows data between a source object property and a target element property, discrete values that are going to flow back and forth, where those values can be a single primitive value, they can be a complex object, or they can be an entire collection of complex objects. Now it's important to note that the terms source and target can get a little confusing because in two-way data binding, those fields on the screen may be editable. And if you have two-way binding enabled, those arrows can reverse and allow data to flow from the target down into the source object. The names don't change at that point. The source is still the source. The target is still the target in data binding terms. But just realize that the flow reverses in the case of two-way data binding when edits are made in the screen. So another key thing to keep in mind is that the target properties of a binding must be dependency properties. That typically means that they are a property defined on a framework element that's part of the WPF framework, but they could be custom dependency properties on your own objects. But the thing you hook the binding up to directly is going to be a dependency property. The source object property does not have to be a dependency property.